Dear Vice President Mogherini, dear Vice President Peters, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this video conference organized by the Bridge Forum Dialogue in cooperation with the College of Europe Alumni Group in Luxembourg. The series of Bridge Forum conferences has seen some of the most eminent personalities of European politics and academics. However, today's conference still stands out. We are particularly happy to have you, Mrs. Mogherini, with us here to discuss EU foreign policy, its highs and lows, and the lessons learned from the past. Thank you very much for joining us from Bruges. Who would be better placed to address this topic than our speaker tonight? Mrs. Mogherini has been the Foreign Minister of Italy and most notably the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission from 2014 to 2019. Before this, she was a member of the Italian Chamber of Deputies from 2008 onwards. Her academic career is not less impressive. As you surely know, Mrs. Mogherini is now Director of the College of Europe. She is also a Fellow of Harvard Kennedy School and the German Marshall Fund, among other important positions. As such, she perfectly bridges practice and theory of foreign policy. As the European Union's chief diplomat, Mrs. Mogherini was the face of Europe in the world for the second half of the last decade. This was a time that saw some drastic changes in the external parameters for the European Union's external actions. The United States under the Trump administration turning from friend to, if not foe, at least opponent on the world stage. China unleashing its political and military power, and Russia pulling further back from a common ground. The European Union's reliance on multilateralism and a rules-based international order as the cornerstones of its foreign policy was increasingly put into question. It became very clear that acting in unity is essential for the European Union to remain, in the true sense, global player that is able to actively shape the international order in which it operates. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you for being with us tonight, Mrs. Mogherini. Unfortunately, President Hoyer, the President of the EIB, cannot join us tonight because of a duty that he has abroad. But I'm very happy that Vice President Peters from the European Investment Bank is so kind to step in for a more in-depth introduction. Thank you very much. Vice President Peters, please, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, President Lehne. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants to the first Bridge Forum Dialogue of 2021, it is my pleasure to introduce this evening's guest speaker, Federica Mogherini. Madame Mogherini is rector of the College of Europe in Bruges, and I'm from the Flemish part of Belgium. We call it Brugge, which for over 70 years, through its teaching and research, has contributed to and helped develop the arguments for European integration. Indeed, it's a historic campus in Belgium, and since 1992, in Twin Campus in Poland, are the alma mater for many, many who work in the EU institutions, both here in Luxembourg and elsewhere. Prior to her current role from 2014 to 2019, Madame Mogherini was the European Union's High Representative and Commission Vice President responsible, you know that, for foreign and security policy. More important is during her time in office, she oversaw the signature of the in 2015 Iran Nuclear Accord, and in 2017 launch of the EU's Permanent Structured Cooperation and Security and Defence, to name but 2 milestones, and a lot of others is, of course, you also well aware. She also served previous as Italy's foreign minister. This makes her uniquely qualified to provide us with some thoughts today on the EU foreign policy, her first-hand experience of how it works in practice, and lessons, of course, we should learn from for the future. I can think of no better time for this debate than today. You know that, like President Lehne said, I'm a new Vice President of the Bank of the European Union, and as the European Investment Bank has vested interest in this debate very, very much. Last year, ladies and gentlemen, we committed over 9 billion euros of our 65 billion euros of lending to projects outside the EU, including record amounts in Africa, making us an important tool of economic diplomacy. In recent years, we have been involved closely in EU support for countries affected by conflict in Syria and for Ukraine. And indeed, what President Lehne already said, the president of our bank is now for the moment in Kiev to discuss with Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, a lot of very important issues. And that's the reason why he's not with us tonight. We are currently very much focused on the global health and climate crisis, of course. It is now more than 20 years since the Amsterdam Treaty created a post of High Representative, and it is just over 10 years since the Lisbon Treaty led to the establishment of the European External Action Service. It is therefore natural to ask, at the start of the new European political and budgetary cycle, how this institutional setup is working. For example, under a self-proclaimed geopolitical European Commission, what is the role today of the High Representative and this agency? Then there is the global context, of course. Until recently, Europe had become a lone voice in defending the multilateral institutions and frameworks for common global action put in place after World War II. Shaken by Brexit, challenged in our neighborhood by Russia and Turkey, in Africa by China and by other closest allies, the US on a host of topics, from trade to approach to Iran, we launched our own drive to achieve what we called strategic autonomy. But now America is back under a new president committed to rebuild and rebuilding some of the bridges burned by his predecessor. Will renewed US engagement on issues like climate help or hinder our own efforts to speak with one voice? Then there are the two pressing challenges of our time, the COVID-19 crisis and climate change, which are creating new tensions between rich and poor countries, even within our union. Both have the capability to generate social instability and political crisis in our partner countries around the world. Clearly, Europe can help. We have the vaccines and the healthcare systems. We have renewable energy and other value technologies. But are we prepared to think development big together and take the steps necessary to make an impact together? Frederica, perhaps you can help us answer some of these questions, and it is for me once again a great pleasure and honor to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. President, thank you, and thank you for inviting me and hosting me. Unfortunately, only in this virtual manner for the time being. It would really be a pleasure to be with you tonight, and hopefully this will be possible in the near future. I would also like to thank the alumni of the college for having helped in the organization of this event. And also I would like to thank you, Mr. Vice President, for your kind words about Brugge, as I now call it also, even if my Flemish is still lagging behind. I might try to learn a little bit, but it's not an easy language. But indeed, the added value of the network that the college offers to our students and then alumni is impressive. And indeed, I constantly receive inputs from them, from different institutions, including in Luxembourg, but also international organizations, and how valuable this network of support and contacts is and remains over time. So it is at the same time a pleasure for me to join you, but also regret that I cannot be physically in presence with you tonight. Hopefully next time. I will try to share with you some, as you asked me to do, some thoughts. So don't expect a formal written speech, also because in my experience, after so many months of online meetings, it is the best way of making the most out of it is having an informal interactive exchange as much as we can. But I will be very happy, and it will be also very interesting for me to exchange after my initial thoughts with the audience. Some thoughts about my personal experience in this 5 years I've spent in what is often defined as the impossible position in the European Union institutions. What I experienced in terms of positive terms, in terms of shortcomings, some of the lessons I have drawn and also shared with some of friends and colleagues that then have also continued their experience in the institutions. Well, maybe the first, and I will do it candidly because now I don't represent anyone but myself and the college. But here I don't express positions that imply an involvement for the College of Europe. So I will do it candidly and very openly and frankly. The first lesson I've learned, it was really in the very first days and weeks of my arrival in Brussels from Rome. And I was coming from, as you said, a position of Italian foreign minister, not only, but Italian foreign minister that was at the time holding the rotating presidency of the Council. There was this strange symbolism of coincidence that we basically moved from, together with Catherine Ashton, my predecessor, from Milan, where we were having the informal foreign ministers meeting together, to Brussels for the announcement of my appointment. During the presidency that Italy was holding. So for me, it was really seeing the EU foreign policy first as a foreign minister of a member state holding the presidency, and then on the other side in Brussels. But my first impression was this: everybody was telling me before I started that I was taking an impossible position, an impossible job. That the Lisbon Treaty was creating a role that was definitely impossible to sustain because of the concentration of different tasks and responsibilities, the so-called famous two hats, being the Vice President of the Commission, responsible for all external action of the European Commission, but also at the same time being the President of a very important council formation, the Foreign Affairs Council, with all its different formations, foreign ministers, defense ministers, development ministers. By the way, that was for me an excellent opportunity to work so closely with, at the time, the development minister of Belgium, that is now the Prime Minister, Alexander De Croo, and that created also excellent links. And then obviously leading the External Action Service, a proper ministry somehow, a service, a diplomatic service of extremely high quality and complexity, and also a third hat, actually, that is almost never mentioned, because the High Representative is also the head of the European Defence Agency, which implies some responsibilities. So I arrived in Brussels with this slight pressure of people telling me, you're getting an impossible job, give up thinking that you can do it properly if you want to do everything, because it is simply impossible. And the first lesson I would like to share with you is that not only it's possible, but I wouldn't change a single word or a comma of the Lisbon Treaty when it comes to the role of the High Representative Vice President. I believe that actually if we manage to do some of the positive things we've managed to do during those 5 years that were indeed complicated, and I'll come to that, it was exactly because and precisely because I could move different levers. By the way, among those levers, there was indeed the bank that was fundamental and crucial and instrumental to put in place so many of the actions, external actions that we put in place during those years, from the package in support of Ukraine, by the way, to some of our key projects in key conflict areas, like in Syria or in Africa. So the bank is among those important, extremely important instruments in the toolkit of the European institutions, to which the High Representative can have access. And by the way, I've always been grateful for the excellent cooperation we have established with the President. And I'm sure that I will have the opportunity to meet him soon and hopefully host him and also yourself, Mr. Vice President, either in Bruges or in Natolin, in our campus in Warsaw. But this to say that all the times that we managed to put together something good and achieve something historical, I would say historical. You mentioned the defense initiatives, the global strategy, the Iran nuclear deal. In all these cases, and many others, in all these cases, I imagine, for instance, all the partnership agreements we've made on managing migration with countries of origin and transit, all the times we intervene to support or save literally multilateralism and the UN system, the climate change agreement, all of that was possible only when and every time we managed to put together the different levers of action that we have across the institutions. If you think of the activities we had on the decisions and the implementation of the decisions we had on defense, literally historical, because after 60 years of debates about the European Union defense, we actually put in place the foundations for a real European Union defense, turning something that was on paper in the Lisbon Treaty, for instance, PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation, into something real. It was exactly because we managed to put together the Commission with the proposals and the finances and the resources for supporting these actions. The European Parliament, not to be forgotten at all, the support of the External Action Service in preparing all the files, and also the Military Committee, the European Defence Agency preparing all the technical files, and the Council. Not only the European, the Foreign Affairs Council, but also the European Council, to which the High Representative is constantly invited. Pulling together the strings has allowed us to move relatively fast, because the global strategy was adopted in June 2016, by the way, a few days after the Brexit referendum in a dramatic European Council. And the work on the European Union defense was implemented a few months later. So not only unanimously, I'll come back to the point of unanimity in a moment, not only unanimously, but also quite fast, and with different institutions and different parts inside the different institutions, for instance, different DGs in the European Commission, coordinating and creating synergies so that the decision-making and then implementation of decisions was actually the result of a collective work. In my experience, and I gave just the example of the work we did on defense, but I could apply the same kind of example to all the areas where we managed to achieve good results. The climate action was one of those, or the Iran nuclear deal, where we had work on the Council level and on the Commission level. We had work on nuclear-related issues and on sanction issues, on trade-related issues, on investment issues. To me, the key to success in those years, even in very difficult circumstances and challenging to say the least in some cases, was the capacity and the ability and the authority, the legitimacy that the High Representative Vice President has to coordinate and together and create synergies across institutions, among institutions, and within different institutions. This to me was key. I have to say, for me, it was also probably the door opener for that, playing fully that kind of double role that was actually a multiplied role, was the decision I took in the very first days to have my main office not at the External Action Service building, but at the Berlaymont, to signal to the colleagues in the Commission that I was intending to play at full my role as Vice President. An excellent understanding with President Juncker and also with all other colleagues, but also with, at the time, President Tusk on the European Council. So I would say the lesson learned, my first lesson learned was Lisbon Treaty was perfect in describing this role, so much that I would actually encourage, if ever a revision of the treaties will happen, to think of similar combinations of responsibilities and duties and roles also for other figures and job descriptions in the European institutions. I think that bridging the Commission and the Council has proven to be, as I said, not only possible, but also very desirable, and it works. So for me, the first lesson was this. It was not only possible, but it was key and instrumental to achieve results, to play at full all the different institutional hats that and responsibilities that the High Representative has. And this implies, second lesson learned, but that was very evident from the very first day and even before starting, this implies a constant focus on bridging the distance or the gap among institutions and within institutions. I perfectly remember, and this can be considered as a high, when we managed to put things together as a puzzle that composes a picture. And it can also be considered as a low, because still it is needed, I believe still today, to put an extra effort in passing the message inside our European institutions that we are one, that the European Union is the European Union, and there is not us and them, being us, the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, whatever, and them, the other one. Bridging this distance, bridging and merging this potential competition or confrontation that sometimes we see is the second lesson I've immediately learned. Priority number one of any, I think, any official that serves the institutions is to try and create opportunities for cooperation and synergies rather than fueling competition and confrontation among institutions. Why? First of all, because you don't achieve results otherwise. You enter into a potentially endless exercise that takes away a lot of time and resources and doesn't lead to a decision-making that is effective. But also, seen from the eyes of someone that has dealt with external partners, our external partners don't see us as different institutions. They see the European Union flag. No matter if the flag is represented by the Commission, the Council, the Parliament, whoever, it's the European Union. And so the external projection of the Union needs to be done in a coordinated and non-conflictual manner. And I have to say, to me, another lesson learned, instrumental to achieve this improvement of the coordination and the creation of synergies across and among institutions has been the establishment of the Commissioners Group on External Action. This was something that was existing already under Barroso, but it was meeting in a very restricted format. It was what normally was referred to as the RELEX commissioners. So it was mainly humanitarian development, obviously the High Representative, and neighborhood and sometimes trade. With Juncker, we agreed from the very beginning, actually even before I started, it was in my letter, letter before I started, to have this, first of all, not chaired by the President of the Commission anymore, but by the Vice President High Representative, which made it more operational. to have it every single month. So every month we had a meeting with commissioners on External Action Service, and most importantly, to broaden it not only to the commissioners that were the traditionally external commissioners, but having invitations on the basis of the agenda. And this to me was a game changer, because we established a practice that I believe is still ongoing, to my knowledge, for which we decided if we had, I don't know, the March meeting of this group on strategy towards China, you could have 16 commissioners in the room, commissioners and vice presidents, spanning from digital to transport to economy and finances, to science and technology, education, you name it. And so I think that once we actually had the entire college of commissioners present, apart from the president, in some of these meetings. And this helped preparing the commission proposals, also having a view on the agenda of the council. Because normally these meetings were preparing the commission proposals with a view to what the ministers would have discussed later on. And in this manner, and sometimes, by the way, also with the bank, we triangulated a bit this kind of decisions. I think, for instance, of all the discussions on the financial architecture of our work on development, on partnership, but also on the post-Cotonou agreement. All of this helped fine-tuning and getting the right tone and creating the consensus that made it easier then to bring on the same page Council and Commission, playing the role on the two sides, playing the role of the Vice President as coordination and preparation of the Commission proposals, and then obviously chairing the Council and establishing the agenda for the Council of the Foreign Ministers. I have to admit that many times for me it was difficult to sit in the Foreign Affairs Council chairing it and sitting opposite to my colleagues, commissioners, that were proposing things that we had prepared together, because I felt ownership of what was coming from the Commission, even if I would say the choreography of the meeting was signaling a contraposition of the two elements. So maybe this is something, the choreography maybe could be changed, but I think that this practice of coordinating and fine-tuning Commission proposals and Foreign Affairs Council agendas is also something that might be, again, usefully applied to other fields, but it needs to have someone that can play this double role on the side of the coordinating the Commission policies and on the side of coordinating the Council policies. If you don't have the link, then you miss the individual element that can bring the two agendas together. And if I can add a note to that without being too long, I'm sorry, I'm getting into details, but I know that our audience is experienced enough about the functioning of the European institutions to follow me on this detailed level of explanation of how things, I have seen at least how things work. And for me, what was even more important in this process of coordinating the commissioners was the fact that you might have a 1 hour meeting with all commissioners, or with, I don't know, 10 commissioners in the room for 1 hour on every month. But from the moment when this meeting finishes, so the March meeting, for instance, ends today, this time, from the day after, all DGs, all services, all cabinets have to start preparing the following one. And so you create a practice of cooperation and exchange of information across and among institutions to prepare then the decision-making of the commissioners. And this changed the dynamic with the External Action Service somehow at the center of it. This completely changed the dynamic of, I think, creating, yes, a different, even information flow that sometimes is missing in our couloir in our institutions. Having said that, not everything was perfect. That is clear. But I'll try to focus now on maybe another two lessons I've learned. One other one is the speed issue. We often refer to the European Union decision-making as a lengthy and slow, complicated decision-making process. This is perceived by our citizens. Sometimes it's perceived by ourselves, a certain sense of frustration, why a decision cannot be implemented fast. And sometimes it's perceived also by our interlocutors outside of the Union. Many times I've had exchanges with third parties and third countries accusing the European Union of being too slow. Maybe sometimes you take a decision for a project or even financial support, and then it comes with some technicalities which make it heavy but transparent, and some delay, or at least a time span that is long. Well, the lesson I've learned is actually that the decision-making in the European Union institutions, both in the Commission and in the Council, can be extremely fast, if there is enough political will to recognize the urgency of the decision to be taken. I'll give you, well, I've already shared with you the example on defense, where it was unanimous and fast in a conflictual field, because it was a very divisive field, the issue of defense before, and in times of Brexit on top of everything. And yet it was unanimous and fastly implemented. But what was the most striking example for me of capacity to go fast if there is political will was, for instance, when we established in 2015, now it's old history, but we established the naval military operation in the Mediterranean Sea, Operation Sophia. The decision was taken in May and the operation was operational in June. And according to including our militaries, 1 month to move from the decision taken at the Council and the ships at sea would have been completely impossible. And yet it was done. Why? Because there was a sense of urgency shared by member states, all of them, that something needed to be done before the summer. And so we were able to mobilize enough political will and enough also force generation in that case to have everything operational in the record time of 1 month. This means that, and I could give other examples of fast decisions that were taken. I think, for instance, that after a certain slow reaction last year, decisions that were taken on anti-COVID measures, being it on the sanitary level and on the economic and financial support to the member states, have been fast. Again, after a certain moment of slow reaction that was, I think, rooted in the fact that not all member states were perceiving the urgency of the problem equally. The other side of the coin here is that sometimes you have the doubt that if a decision is not taken and implemented in a fast manner, this might not actually be because of difficulties or technical reasons, but because of a lack of will. Because if a decision can be taken and implemented fastly, then you wonder if this is not the case, whether it is what we sometimes hear referred as a bureaucratic burden, or if it is a lack of political will to advance fastly. Because when the will is there, then the European Union can be extremely fast and efficient. Last point I would like to raise of lessons learned in my experience is the issue of speaking with one voice, or the issue of unanimity. I know this is an extremely fascinating issue, and many people feel very strongly about that. I have, as a starting point, I have my own personal experience. Maybe because I was coming from being a minister of a member state. And so for me, the starting point was that of trying to synchronize the voices rather than eliminating them. I always thought that having many voices was a plus, not a minus. I never identified this as a problem. Having many voices can actually allow you sometimes even to have a division of labor. The important point to me has always been, and I'm still very much convinced of that, that we don't need one single voice. We need many instruments playing the same song. Let's put it this way. then the real issue here is the, again, in my experience, and I guess that now this might have changed slightly, but you should ask Borrell, and I'm free from assessments on the present. In my personal experience, unanimity has never been approved. We never had in 5 years, and you know, Foreign Affairs Councils take place every month. So the High Representative is the person, is the single individual in the top level institutions, institutional roles that chairs/takes part to the highest number of councils every month, every year, because he chairs or she chairs the Foreign Affairs Council every month. On top of that, the defense ministerials and the others. I never in 5 years experienced, not even once, a decision or a council conclusion that was not taken because of lack of unanimity. Never once. And this is why, in my humble personal opinion, moving to qualified majority voting might not be necessarily something that would solve issues or problems. Obviously, creating consensus on unanimity decision requires a lot of work. In order to take a decision that is consensual and unanimous, you need to start preparing it well in advance. You need to listen. You need to include different aspects in the decisions you prepare. It requires a lot of energy and time and human resources and intellectual efforts. But on the other side, it provides you with an instrument that is extremely powerful afterwards. Because I've always thought that if, being the High Representative, I had to go and talk to one of our interlocutors, our third parties interlocutors, being it China or the United States during the presidency of Trump, or Russia, or I don't know, but also cooperative interlocutors, you name it, whatever. And with the council position, and my interlocutor would know that this position is the result of a division that is black on white, that is on paper, that is registered. And this interlocutor would tell me, and will tell the next High Representative, in case of qualified majority voting introduced, would say, but here you're not representing the 27. At my time, still 28. This is the position of this number of countries. And this would weaken the position of the European Union externally, because the picture of an internal division would become formal. And in this respect, then the position of the High Representative in representing the interests and the values that the Union works for externally would definitely be weakened. Having said that, there is a real problem of ownership among member states, I believe. So far, I've shared the positive, the high, and the high for me has been this. Again, we managed to have all decisions taken unanimously, still at 28, after the Brexit referendum, even on defense. So I think that this was the top, somehow, example of the fact that formally, it's not the unanimity voting that was a problem. The problem I have experienced several times, luckily not often, but I have experienced it several times, was not the decision making, was the implementation of decisions. Ministers taking a decision together in the council room and then getting out, going back home and saying they have decided, even if he or she was obviously part of the decision making. Brussels has decided. This pointing the finger at Brussels, I think, doesn't work only for the Belgian ministers for obvious reasons. But this game of taking distance from a decision that you have contributed to take, this is the real problem. But actually, I'm afraid that with a qualified majority voting, this lack of ownership, this distancing might even increase. Because then there will be an easy way out. I have to admit, and probably my former colleagues in the foreign ministers of the member states probably know that well. I have to admit that sometimes I have used the unanimity rule to achieve consensus on a decision, because then member states know that they risk not having a decision at all on something that might be extremely urgent for them to have something on. difficult to go back home and say there's nothing on this, when maybe you have announced publicly that you're going to Brussels to discuss important issues and then go back without something taken. So sometimes it's a leverage, it's an instrument with which you can actually say, you know, if there's no consensus, we simply have no decision on this. And this is a responsibility you would all share. And this can be politically unsustainable for some. So in this respect, I think that if there is a lesson to be learned is that what needs to be, I think, worked on and increased is the level of ownership of decisions and their implementation, their follow-up. Also, and especially, I would say, in foreign policy, because, and I'll close maybe with that, because foreign policy is not based on legislation. It doesn't turn into legislative acts, if not very rarely. What is it that makes foreign policy alive? Once upon a time, and very limitedly now, the symbolism of visits, of exchanges of delegations, but most importantly, statements, words are extremely important. Actions on the ground, coordinated action in the capitals around the world. And this requires member states to take ownership of what we decide at the European Union. And if you have something on paper and then the following day, the foreign minister of one country or another, of one member state or another, says something different than what he or she has contributed to decide in the previous day, that is what really put in danger the unity of and effectiveness of the Union. So again, I'm afraid, not sure this is good news, I'm afraid that the formality of the decision-making would not solve the real problem we are facing, which is a certain element of detachment that I register from capitals, not all of them, but some. And on some issues, probably on at least one issue all, there's not good guys and bad guys here, but this is the real issue that would need to be addressed, and this is a political issue. It's not formally solvable. I think it's solvable only with a lot of work on the construction of a common identity. I have to say, it's exactly because I've learned this lesson that I decided to move to the College of Europe, because I thought that building a common ground among those that will then serve, hopefully, the institutions and hopefully will serve them well, trying to shape the way in which they can look at the European Union construction and try to overcome and to bridge this sense of distance between capitals and the European Union institutions, buildings somehow, is the way to go if we want to address the shortcomings we are currently facing. And indeed, as you already mentioned, the College of Europe started actually before the European Union itself. And the mission of the college is that of contributing to the shaping of the European integration. And this is for me an essential mission today, not less than it was more than 70 years ago, because I think we need to somehow contribute to a certain renaissance of the European Union. And this can only start from the generations that are already today having ideas and energies to share, to shape a better and more integrated and more effective union, including on the field of foreign policy and security policy. I could have raised plenty of other examples and shared plenty of other stories, but I stop it here for the sake of time. I'm sorry I've been probably even a bit too long already, but it's a fascinating theme, and I'll be happy to share more on individual issues that might be raised in the Q&A session. And again, thank you for the invitation, the attention, and the excellent forum provided.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mogherini. I think that was really an excellent presentation. I learned a lot of that, what you have said, and probably all the other participants here as well. We cannot give you the applause that you should have to get normally, but you know, this is a video conference. It's quite difficult. But I now pass the floor to the moderators. I've heard that we have a moderator in the off who will deal with the questions and comments, because I do not have the technical means here. They have it, so I pass to the moderator. Please.
Mrs. Mogherini, we've had during and before the session many questions coming in. To be able to address most of them, we've summarized them in a few broader subjects. The first one is, Mrs. Mogherini, during your time as High Representative, you have been very careful for the EU to maintain a constructive relationship with Russia. How do you judge this approach today? And apart from recent unhappy developments, how do you see the relationship develop in the medium and longer term, also considering differences in approach among EU member states?
Yes, consider that I started in 2014, so the peak of, let's say, the shift from considering Russia a strategic partner, as it was considered by the European Union, and by the way, also by NATO, before 2014, and the shift from that to sanctions imposed and political meetings suspended for a certain period of time at high level, obviously because of the Russian intervention in Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. That I believe here is another lesson learned. Everybody always says that the European Union is not united. That was an example of a difficult decision, the imposition of sanctions on Russia for its behavior on Ukraine. But that was a decision that was achieved unanimously, still under Catherine Ashton, and then kept till today still. And sometimes we focus on small divisions and we forget to look at the big elements on which the Union is united. And I think we don't, we're not fair when we do it. So yes, I have experienced the most difficult times probably in the relations with Russia. I remember very tough conversations with Lavrov and very tense exchanges all over the mandate. I have to say, I've always considered this as a three steps approach somehow. First, the unity on the sanctions and the reaction that the European Union had to have together with all the member states in a solidarity and common approach on the imposition of sanctions and the tough line on the reaction on the Russian behavior on Ukraine. Second, but sanctions on a country do not represent in themselves a policy. Once we achieved that, we knew what we were not anymore with Russia. We were not anymore partners. We were not anymore strategic partners. But what were we? And the definition of this second step, what is there and what can be developed as we keep the hard stand on the sanction line, the dialogue part, the engagement part, the people-to-people part was to be built. And this was as difficult as building unanimity and consensus and unity on the hard line, on the sanction line. And we came up with these 5 principles that were shared, and that I think are still the compass of the European Union formal position on the relations with Russia. Was basically based on the assumption that, first of all, contacts among people and societies, including the economic diplomacy, to the extent possible with the sanction regime in place, is good for both sides and for dialogue and cooperation globally. But also the key principle on which I've always strongly believed, that you can be extremely clear and tough on your messages, but this should never prevent you, first, from having an open dialogue. Actually, the more you have an open dialogue, the more you can allow yourself to be tough. And vice versa, the more you're tough on the things on which you have to be tough, the more you can allow yourself to have a dialogue open. But the position on sanctions and obviously our reaction on the Ukrainian file shouldn't have prevented us from developing cooperation in the areas where cooperation with Russia was possible / desirable / needed. If it was not for this approach, we would have never managed, for instance, to safeguard what is remaining of the nuclear deal with Iran, where actually when the United States went out of the agreement, we had to keep the rest together. Russia, China, obviously the three, Iran itself, and the rest of the international community. Partners in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, around Europe, Canada, the United Nations system itself. And the same goes, for instance, on the status of Jerusalem, where with Russia, we always kept an open channel because we needed to make sure that as the United States were shifting position, at least the UN, Russia, and the European Union, the other members of the quartet on the Middle East peace process, kept the same position. So a differentiated approach. And I think this is the way forward also, with a special focus to the younger generations. One element was always striking for me, and that was at a certain moment I noticed, I don't know the numbers now, but at a certain moment I noticed that the students that were benefiting the most out of the Erasmus program from outside of the European Union were the Russian students. And I always thought that this was an extremely relevant indicator of the fact that investing in the younger generation's movement and connections could be the best investment for us to, at a certain moment, go back or restore a perspective of partnership with a country that is our neighbor. You don't. There are two or three things you don't change in life. You don't change geography. You don't change the history, and you don't change normally your parents. This is something you have and you keep. But history and geography are there, and you have to deal with them. So Russia is not going to disappear. And I believe that engaging and being clear on what are our principles, values, and interests, extremely clear, is the basis for having also dialogue that allows engagement and possibly also cooperation. I'm sorry, I've been too long. I'll try to be shorter on the next answers.
Please don't. Ms. Mogherini, EU foreign policy has been considering very highly democracy, human rights, liberalism in partner countries. There are two questions in context of this. Is this approach meeting expectations of the partner countries? And second, is the EU outpaced in many instances, e.g. in Africa, by unconditional Chinese action and investments?
Very good questions. First of all, yes, the European Union is, I would say, the most consistent player globally, investing in human rights, rule of law, and democracy-based foreign policy. I think we compete on that with Canada, and that's it in terms of consistency. I hope and I believe that the United States of today will go back to investing a lot on a foreign policy that is based on human rights values. But I personally remember very clearly and very sadly the moment when at the time Secretary of State of the United States, I think it was Tillerson, declared publicly that from that moment onwards, the United States foreign policy was not based on human rights assumptions anymore. That created an extremely difficult environment for us to continue working, because obviously our interlocutors were telling us, well, are you sure you're on the right track? Because maybe you look around, even your allies don't follow you on this. And I have to say, as I would not shy away from the negative sides also of the European Union action, I have to say that sometimes the member states on human rights issues have, I would say, a fluctuating approach. In some cases, there are inconsistencies inside the European Union. I believe that we still have work to do on human rights standards inside the European Union. And I have to tell you, the months and the years of the so-called refugee crisis were difficult months for me. Difficult to go around and advocate respect of human rights fully when your interlocutors could tell you, are you sure 100% that you are respecting in all member states human rights values and principles all the time? And my answer had to be, you are right, there is work to be done also inside our borders. And it's indeed, the work on human rights and democracy is a work in progress. It's never achieving perfection. But So credibility and consistency at home is an issue. And also the other issue is that very often member states are happy and eager to adopt a foreign policy based on human rights at the European Union level, but are also equally happy and eager to let this be expressed by the European Union only and not to raise it bilaterally in the countries where they are. Because obviously this is something that is more easily done by the European Union, let's put it this way. And this weakens the position of the European Union in some countries. Coming to the precise element of the questions, many of our interlocutors in the world consider the focus of the European Union on human rights and rule of law and democracy as a European obsession and sometimes a Western obsession. You want to impose your values on us. And it's very simple and very basic to respond that these are universal values, and what we're doing is simply upholding the UN Charter, which is a universal one. But indeed, this is, I believe still is, it has been in my time, one element of friction with many interlocutors, sometimes key strategic interlocutors, to whom we had to, not demand, but with whom we had to build partnerships on some important, for instance, regional crises. I think of the Mediterranean, the Middle East, Libya, Syria, you name it, the Horn of Africa, plenty of. And I think on my side, at least, there was always the insistence on the fact that nothing could overshadow the importance of respecting human rights and rule of law standards. Not even, and mostly not, and most importantly not, security considerations. I have faced several times this narrative that we sometimes hear also at home, that for security reasons, human rights standards need to be lowered. I believe this is the wrong attitude, always. The more you invest in the resilience of your society, well, the more you invest in human rights and rule of law, the more you invest in the resilience of your society, and the more your society is resilient, the more secure your country is. I believe that this is the European way, and we have to be proud of that, provided that we manage to follow it at all. Last but not least, Africa and China. Many times I've heard from not only the African interlocutors, also others, this story that, and the bank has for sure heard that a lot, that our money, that the European money come with too many strings attached. Human rights standards, rule of law, and also the complexity of the procedures, because we require transparency and accountability. And yes, indeed, that is the case. But the important point is that at the end of the day, I believe those that are in good faith then tell you two things. One, it is true, it takes time on the European Union side to mobilize resources. It takes a lot of paperwork. It takes a lot of accountability and transparency issues, but you are reliable. Once the decision is taken, it's taken and is kept. And during the years of the Trump administration, many were coming to me telling me, you remember 2 years ago, I told you you were too slow, too much paperwork, too much bureaucracy. You know what? We now appreciate that, because once that decision is taken, we know that we can count on that. Because the lengthy decision-making process is also a guarantee of stability afterwards. We are reliable. And then others were coming back to me and saying, it's true, the Chinese money comes fast and without any strings attached. But then you find out the strings after 10, 15 years when you have to pay back the debt. And the sustainability, not only ecological sustainability, environmental sustainability, but also the financial sustainability of our money. And here again, the vice president of the bank can say much more than I can, but the sustainability of the money we mobilize for the future of the societies and the institutions we interact with is a key element that all institutions of third countries that are in good faith will recognize always.
Another question, what is the right level and direction of economic diplomacy, as referred to already by Vice President Peters, versus political diplomacy, and how and by whom is foreign policy decided in the EU?
Personally, I strongly believe in the power of economic diplomacy. I think this is something that is sometimes underestimated, not on a national level, but on the European level. There's another instrument that I believe is underestimated in diplomacy at the European Union level, and we tried to bridge this limits, and this is the power of culture in diplomacy. We always are very much aware of our culture, of our soft power, and sometimes we don't use it enough. But the Vice President mentioned something extremely important before. He referred to the strategic autonomy elements in the context of the economic power of the European Union. And I would like to echo that and support that a lot, because normally strategic autonomy is referred to in the context of military and security perspectives. And it is true. This is how the debate started, and this is also how the debate was growing in these last years. And I believe we've done a lot in this respect. By the way, always keeping an eye to strengthening the relations with NATO in the same vein. But I think the real frontier today of our strategic autonomy is clearly not so much the military one or the security one, is the economic and financial one. And there were two occasions when this was self-evident in these last years. Number one, Iran. Following the Iran nuclear deal, trade and investments with Iran became legitimate, not only for the Europeans, but also for everybody. It was a UN Security Council resolution. Trade and investment are legitimate. Nuclear-related sanctions are lifted. And so we invited banks, companies, private sector to invest and trade with Iran. And then we found out that our economic and financial sector, including our companies, our business, were too much exposed to links with the United States to be somehow safe from the influence of decisions that were taken elsewhere. Another example, Cuba, the same. The impact, the extraterritorial impact of sanctions that are imposed, decided in Washington and imposed from the United States on banks and companies outside of the United States, was hitting mainly the European Union companies and banks, in that particular case of Cuba, mainly hotel companies. And this means that, and we found out that we had very little instruments to protect the strategic autonomy in the economic field of our investments and our banking relations. So I believe that the next step of building a real strategic autonomy is looking at the financial and economic strategic autonomy. Another example, the use of the currency. I've often been asked, always in relation to the Iran case, from other countries, can we use the euro to do transactions on, for instance, buying oil and gas, which is normally done in dollars. I believe that, and for an economic power like the European Union, I think that this is a very serious shortcoming. At the end of the Juncker Commission, we started working on this. I know that this is on the agenda of the Commission today. It is not really a competence for the High Representative. This is more on the field. Let's put it this way, it's more on Dombrovskis' desk than on Borrell's desk today. But I think it is essential to solve this issue if we want to preserve a credible strategic autonomy in the future. And the bank can help on that, definitely.
Another question, has the EU put enough emphasis and speed on developing political and economic relations with India?
Speed, probably not. Emphasis and focus and energy, definitely yes. I can share my personal memories and experiences on that. And considering that India for me was a particularly delicate case, I don't think I commented on that publicly ever since, because I was coming to Brussels, I was coming to the position of High Representative of the Union from being the foreign minister of a country that had an open and painful case with India. That now is solved, luckily. But there was some progress issues that I was afraid could have been heavy on on my shoulders when dealing with the EU-India partnership, a partnership that was already complex, let's put it this way. I'm very proud, it's one of the things I'm most proud of the fact that there was a turning point at a certain moment in my mandate. Specifically, I think it was 2017 when we had 2018 when we had an excellent preparation of a summit in Delhi. That was extremely positive and extremely, I would say the turning point when we put on the agenda so many practical things that we could do together with India. I think Europeans tend to be rather slow in understanding the power, not only the economic power, but also the geopolitical power of India, not only in the Indo-Pacific, but also globally. And I would be very much in favor of investing more and more and more on that. It's not an easy partnership, not at all. Also because India has its own pace, which is not a fast one at all, and a level of complexity that has nothing less than the European Union complexity. I would put it this way: it's a huge country. So it is not an easy partnership. It is not a partnership that produces projects that are easy to be implemented and followed up, but it's definitely worth it. And I think that we have an enormous number of sectors on which there is a win-win possibility for both of us. And regionally, we tend always to forget the power that India can be and is. We always think of the Asian players in terms of China and Russia, and sometimes Korea and Japan, obviously, but we tend to miss a key element there. And I think this is not smart, because I think that definitely there is a huge potential there.
Another question coming just right now: how do you judge the lack of support or the low level of support of the EU to the Balkans in the pandemic?
I cannot say, I cannot judge if the level of support was high or low. It would be completely unfair from my side. I wouldn't even enter in the discussion about the support that the European Union has given to individual member states. I'm not in a position of judging on that, but I am definitely in the position of saying something on the Balkans, and also with some concern. This is no mystery for anyone. I've never been shy about this. I think that the European Union and some member states in particular have a difficulty in understanding how strategically vital, and I don't say important, I say vital, the Western Balkans are for the Union. We tend to see the Balkans as an area close to us, close to Europe, to which we can give a European perspective, and that needs our support. Maybe because of geography and history, again, maybe because I'm Italian, and you would never say that, but I have a question for you. You know, which is the capital city that is closest to Rome, apart from obviously the Vatican and San Marino? It's the Balkan cities. This to say, maybe it's my geographical background that makes me realize this or think this, but I've always considered, and I'm 100% convinced and strongly convinced, that it's more in the interest of the European Union and the European Union member states to first support the Balkan countries, second, support reform agendas in the Balkan countries, and third, integrate the Balkan countries inside the European Union as soon as possible. When we say giving the Balkans a European perspective, we don't realize that they all have borders with no one else but European Union countries. It's a bubble inside our body. It's not an external part. They are inside us. They are inside our borders. And when we had the refugee crisis in 2015, I remember vividly a meeting that was convened, by the way, in the Berlaymont, in the Commission by Juncker, with all the heads of state and government of the countries affected, including member states, obviously, but also with some Balkan countries. And I perfectly remember in that moment, it was us asking them to help us managing a crisis. And they did. They did. Why? Because they would never say no to the European Union. It's the place where still support to the European Union and the integration process reaches peaks of 80, 90% of popular support. Tell me where else do we have that inside the European Union nowadays? It's a place where the younger generations are open-minded and motivated and see the integration into the European Union as a must. And it's a place where still they understand that peace and reconciliation for them comes with the integration, exactly as it was in the European Union member states 70 years ago. So I would not say anything about COVID support, but I say that the slowing down of the process of integration of the European into the European Union of the Balkan countries is something that we're going to regret. And I hope this can be reverted soon, because it's in our interest. It's also in their interest, but it's mainly and foremost in our interest from an economic point of view, from a security point of view, from a geopolitical point of view, and from many others.
A final question, and with this I close the question box. As rector of the College of Europe, an institution that does a lot of thinking and research on European politics and institutions, what would be your advice to a working group on the revision of the treaties as the first issue to be tackled?
We had just a month ago an extremely interesting conference at the college, virtual, on the future of Europe, on the conference on the future of Europe, opened by the President of the European Parliament, Sassoli. And in that occasion, I thought that we might establish actually at the College of Europe the tradition of having a series of Future of Europe conferences from now on, because in the European Institute in Florence has rightly promoted every year the State of the Union conference on the 9th of May. And I believe that beyond looking at the state of the Union today, we have responsibility for indicating also reflections of younger generations on the future of our Europe. So you might hear more of that in the coming months. On the revision of the treaties, I cannot share advices and reflections institutionally. I cannot represent here a position of the College of Europe. As you said, as the question remarked, rightly, we do a lot of research, and for sure you will find among the publications produced by researchers and professors, and sometimes also students of the College of Europe, several papers and articles that would indicate different options and different views. Personally, what I can say is this: before proceeding to, and I hope I'm wrong, before proceeding to a revision of the treaties, I would make sure that the outcome is not worse than what we have today. I can be very, very brief on this. Because it's true, we have some treaty limitations. But again, one of the key lessons I've learned in my institutional experience in Brussels is that, and when I say Brussels, actually it's not correct, because my institutional experience has been equally in Brussels, Strasbourg, and Luxembourg, at least, and a few other places as well. But the main lesson I've learned is that if there is political will, the treaties provide us the space for doing many more things than what we're doing today. And sometimes I've had the impression that we use the treaties' hypothetical limitations to hide the lack of political will behind institutional limits. And actually, I have the impression that with the existing treaties, there would be a lot more that could be done and explored, and that I wouldn't say that looking at the revision of the treaties might be an excuse not to do everything that can be done with the existing treaties in place, but on certain issues there can be a legitimate doubt. I give you the example of defense. Personally, I've always thought that throwing the issue on the table of the creation of European army was, from some, was a sincere wish to go further in the direction of integration of military assets. But sometimes I've had the impression, and again, in Italian we have a say, difficult to translate in English, which is basically, if you think bad about someone or something, you might make a sin, but you're probably right. It's a very cynical saying, but again, I hope I'm wrong. But sometimes I have the impression that that the best is the enemy of the good, and that's putting on the table the horizon of something perfect could be an excuse of not doing something good that you could do already today.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mogherini. I think that was more or less nearly a perfect last word, but I still have to do some conclusions here. I will do it quite shortly. First, thank you very much for your words. I think we have learned a lot of lessons today, all of us that were listening to you, and you really have a huge experience. And it is very helpful that you are now in this function in which you are. Simply because I think you have defined the two reasons. First is you can deliver information about the background of decision-making in foreign policy, the cooking of foreign policy in the European Union, which of course is not an easy business as far as we all have understood, but which I think at the end has all the opportunities, if at the end there is an agreement and if there's the political will to do so. So it's not the treaty that is more or less the hindrance, it is more or less political will sometimes. And this is connected, it's the second point that you have mentioned, with sometimes a lack of mental integration for the European idea, and that probably we still have to do a lot to form a stronger European identity, to build a stronger European identity, especially when it comes to foreign policy and defense policy. And I think you are really at the right place to trigger this and to teach about this and to create different moods in the new generation for those people that in near future will be in charge of taking decisions within Europe. I still wish you all the best, and of course to you and all of us that had been listening this evening, stay healthy, and all the best and good evening.